The version of MLK we celebrate today is not the one most people would have tolerated when he was still alive. Let's talk about it. The MLK everyone loves today never existed. By the late 1960s, King's approval ratings had collapsed. He was under constant FBI surveillance. The major newspapers called him divisive, reckless, dangerous, and white moderates, especially clergy, were some of his harshest critics. Martin Luther King Jr. was not broadly embraced in his own time. He was tolerated at best, despised at worst. In fact, in 1963, in his letter from Birmingham jail, he said this:
I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block is the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice.
This isn't a quote about villains, it's a quote about nice people who prefer calm over change. Does that sound familiar today? You see, it wasn't just the extremists who opposed King, it was also the everyday people who supported justice eventually. They just didn't support justice urgently. Part 2. The dream gets all the attention, but the diagnosis gets ignored. Most people tend to just remember King talking about all this mountaintop imagery, and then we forget or just choose to ignore that he actually begins by talking about America's moral failures. Here's a quote from that 1963 I Have a Dream speech, only it's from the first half of the speech, the part that most of us tend to just skip right past to get to, the ending. Here's what he said.
America has given the Negro people a bad check. A check which has come back marked insufficient funds.
Before King talks about dreams, he talks about debt. This I Have a Dream speech, at least that's what we call it today, it's not sentimental, it's an indictment. This dream is not escapism, it's accountability. We've turned this I Have a Dream speech into a Hallmark card today, but this speech was a receipt. Part 3, when King started talking about money, his support vanished. Go figure. After the civil rights legislation, King pivoted to economic justice, the Poor People's Campaign. Maybe you've heard of this today. It's still a thing. It started with Dr. King. The Poor People's Campaign terrified political leaders. Donors, allies, and churches quietly began to step back. In a speech in 1967, King said this: "We must recognize that we cannot solve our problem now until there is a radical redistribution of economic and political power." This is a big moment. This is when King became too political, and it's when history begins redacting and retconning our memory of him. Everyone loved King when he talked about dreams, but those opinions change when he starts talking about dollars. And then there was the speech that cost him everything.
The greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government.
This is the moment when King publicly condemned the Vietnam War. 1967, Beyond Vietnam, a time to break the silence. This is the speech. He delivered it at the Riverside Church. Look, that's where I work today. Major newspapers and liberal allies turned on King overnight. He was accused of distracting from civil rights. Stay in your lane. But at some point, all these lanes begin to intersect. And this was the moment when King stopped being useful to power. He connected racism, militarism, and materialism. He refuses single-issue justice. All of it begins to intersect eventually. And it's no coincidence that 1 year after this speech, Beyond Vietnam, 1 year after he began to move out of the lanes that people had been comfortable with him working in, 1 year after this speech, he was assassinated. Martin Luther King Jr. was not assassinated because he had a dream. He was killed, he was murdered because he started calling out the systems.
The greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government.
It's easy to celebrate him one day a year and then ignore him all the rest. We quote him selectively to avoid disruption. Because if we only honor the parts of Dr. King's life and legacy that make us comfortable, we're not honoring him, we're neutralizing him. The question isn't whether or not we like Martin Luther King Jr. The question is whether we're willing to follow him even when he makes us uncomfortable. Now that sounds like something we could say about another guy who was killed by the state for disrupting the political and religious status quo. It all comes down to this. A sanitized prophet is no prophet at all.
America has given the Negro people a bad
The
check.
Negro's great stumbling block is the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice.
A check which has come back marked insufficient funds.
Greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government,